The room was packed, full of co-workers exchanging laughs and carefree toasts. Loud music filled the room while lights flickered, creating an atmosphere that should have been celebratory, but which, for me, would soon turn into something completely different. I shouldn't have been there. I hadn't confirmed my presence at the party, let alone told them that I would be making a surprise appearance. However, something inside me, an inexplicable impulse, a shadow of doubt that refused to be silenced, made me walk through the door. My eyes scanned the room automatically, as if searching for something my brain wasn't yet ready to accept. It didn't take long to find them. There they were, laughing, leaning towards each other like accomplices sharing a secret. The sparkle in her eyes, which had long since faded at home, was there, so evident that it was impossible to ignore. He touched her arm casually, but that touch seemed to carry something far beyond friendship. My chest tightened. My heart was pounding so hard that I could barely hear the music. The crowd around them seemed to disappear, as if the world had frozen at that moment. I stood paralyzed, watching them before they saw me. When they finally realized my presence, the shock was instantaneous. Their laughter died in the air, her eyes went wide, and he pulled his hand away as if he had touched a hot coal. "It's not what it looks like," she said quickly, her voice shaky and fraught with nervousness. "We were just talking." He shook his head, as if to confirm the story, but the blush on his face indicated otherwise. Just talking. Those words echoed in my mind like thunder. An excuse as pathetic as it was predictable. Because I already knew. I knew everything before I even set foot in that party. I'd known for weeks, months perhaps. I knew it from the timetables that didn't match up, from the excuses that sounded rehearsed, from the moments when she smiled into the phone, but not at me. I knew because the clues were all there, but the hardest part wasn't seeing them, it was accepting that they formed a picture that I never wanted to see. I didn't shout, I didn't make a scene, I didn't confront them in front of everyone. My mind was one step ahead, calculating, adjusting the plan I'd already been drawing up in secret. While she babbled apologies and he tried to avoid my gaze, all I could do was let out a bitter laugh, more to myself than to them. There was nothing more to say there. I left the party without looking back, leaving them with the weight of the silence that carried all the truth that was yet to come. On the way home, the emptiness that had taken hold of me gave way to something colder, more controlled. The pain was intense, but it was also combustible. I had discovered that her betrayal wasn't just an emotional issue. It involved something much deeper, something that touched not only the heart, but also the survival of what we had built together. Unbeknownst to her, I had already started to pull the threads together. Bank accounts that wouldn't close, messages deleted in a hurry, business dinners that always seemed to coincide with his schedule. The picture was clear. Her lover wasn't just a colleague or a passing flirtation. He had ambitions, and she was unknowingly being used as a piece in a bigger game. But I wasn't so easy to fool. The weeks I spent feigning ignorance were dedicated to protecting myself, to preparing for the right moment. They thought they were in control, that the truth was buried under a web of well-stitched lies, but I already had all the answers. What they didn't know was that the tables were about to turn, and that I was more than ready to pull the strings that would bring the whole house of cards crashing down. The company party was just the spark that was missing. Every detail of that night was etched in my mind, not to feed the hurt, but to reinforce the determination to move on. They believed that the betrayal would stay within four walls, that I would be the complacent and blind husband. They were wrong. That night, as she walked into the house with her rehearsed excuse on her lips, I looked at her like never before. She tried to explain herself, but the words sounded empty. "I love you," she said, her voice low, almost inaudible. It was a mistake. I didn't reply. There was no need to. The reality was that she had made her choice and I had made mine. All that remained was to wait for the right moment to reveal that, while she was hiding secrets, I was building a plan that would leave her flat. Now, as I look back on everything we built together, I realize that her greatest blow was not against our love, but against the trust that united us. She had no idea that, while she was involved in a web of lies and betrayals, I was one step ahead, protecting what was mine. The point wasn't just to overcome the pain. It was about making sure that, in the end, the truth was revealed in a way that was as devastating as the betrayal she had committed. I knew that confrontation was inevitable, but I wanted it to be on my terms. There was something to be revealed, something they would never suspect, but which would change everything. The truth has immense power, and I was about to use it in a way that no one could have predicted. And now, the stage was set. She and her lover had played with fire, and I was about to show them the price of their choices. What they didn't know, what no one knew, was that the secret I was keeping was the missing piece that would turn their lives into irreversible chaos. And, in the end, the question still loomed: when the moment of revelation arrived, would they be ready to deal with the consequences? Or would it be too late to save anything of what we once called life together? Welcome to the channel. Here, we neither support nor tolerate any form of betrayal. The stories you'll hear are fictional, created to show how betrayal can devastate lives and relationships. Our aim is to bring you powerful reflections on choices and consequences. Get ready to dive into an intense and surprising narrative. Now settle in and get ready for a shocking story that will hold your attention until the very last moment. Nicholas and Emily's house was a representation of a seemingly perfect home. Composed of large windows that let the sun invade the rooms in the morning and a decor that balanced simplicity and sophistication, it seemed like a haven of serenity amidst the chaos of the city. They had been together for more than 8 years and had built a life that, in the eyes of those who knew them, was solid and admirable. Nicholas was a methodical, disciplined and focused man. Working for a multinational technology company, his routine revolved around meetings, tight deadlines and challenging targets. Although work consumed much of his energy, he always made a point of setting aside time for Emily. Dinner at home, a walk in the park or even watching a movie on the sofa were ways to ensure that the marriage stayed connected. Emily, for her part, had a vibrant personality. Creative and communicative, she was the complementary opposite of Nicholas. She worked in a graphic design studio and loved the freedom her profession offered. Unlike her husband, who preferred a predictable routine, Emily liked to explore the new. Her curiosity led her to try out new hobbies, such as photography and painting, and she often dragged Nicholas along on these adventures. He was sometimes reluctant, but deep down he admired her enthusiasm and how she could see beauty in life's little details. However, not everything was as harmonious as it seemed. In recent months, Nicholas had noticed a certain distance from Emily. He tried to justify it as the result of tiredness or the pressure of their work, but something seemed different. Emily was more distracted, often lost in thought. Conversations, once full of humor and complicity, began to become more mechanical, punctuated by short answers. Although this bothered Nicholas, he preferred not to press her, believing that it was just a phase. Emily also felt that something had changed, but it was difficult for her to define exactly what. Perhaps it was the routine that was weighing them down, or the fact that their life goals seemed to be following parallel paths. She loved Nicholas, of that she had no doubt, but a restlessness was growing inside her. Her need for novelty, to explore the unknown, seemed increasingly at odds with Nicholas' almost unshakable stability. Even so, they both kept trying to maintain what they had built. At weekends, Nicholas made an effort to take his mind off work and concentrate on Emily. He would plan small gestures, an afternoon at a cafe she liked, or dinner at her favorite restaurant. Emily would thank him, always with a smile that he thought was sweet, but which never seemed to reach her eyes. Their mutual friends didn't notice what was going on. For them, Nicholas and Emily were the model couple, balanced, in love and inspiring. During social gatherings, Emily was the soul of the party, while Nicholas adopted a more reserved role, but was always attentive to his wife. He watched with pride as she enlivened the atmosphere with her energy, but inside, a twinge of insecurity nagged at him. He wondered if he was still part of Emily's vibrant world or if he was being left behind. Despite these subtle differences, there were moments when the connection between them still seemed genuine. Like the night Emily unexpectedly prepared a special dinner at home, something she hadn't done for a while. Nicholas came home from work to find the table set with candles and his favorite dish served. They laughed and talked like old times and, for a few hours, Nicholas believed that things were getting back to normal. On the other hand, there were times when Emily seemed absent, even when they were together. Like that Saturday morning when Nicholas suggested a walk in the park. She agreed, but spent most of the time looking at her cell phone or answering messages, while Nicholas pretended not to notice. He wanted to ask her who she wrote to so often, but he was afraid of sounding controlling or insecure. Although they both tried hard to keep up appearances, there was a subtext that they both seemed to avoid confronting. Nicholas compensated for his restlessness by immersing himself even more in his work, while Emily sought external distractions, trying to understand her own feelings. The setting around them also contributed to the complexity of the dynamic. Emily spent most of her days in the studio, surrounded by colleagues who admired her talent and encouraged her to go beyond her limits. Among them was David, a charismatic colleague who always seemed to have a word of support or a compliment ready. Emily saw in David a reflection of the enthusiasm she felt she was losing in her own life. Although their interactions were mostly professional, there was something about his presence that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt for a long time. Nicholas, on the other hand, was facing increasing pressure at work. A crucial project had been assigned to him, and its success would mean a great opportunity for promotion. He plunged into the challenge, but not without cost. Late nights at home started to become more frequent, and weekends were often interrupted by work calls. He knew it didn't help the situation with Emily, but he justified to himself that it was all for them, for the future they were building together. However, the more Nicholas dedicated himself to ensuring the couple's financial and emotional stability, the more Emily felt disconnected. She longed for something she couldn't even name, but knew was missing. It was a gap that she tried to fill with her creative activities, her conversations with David and her moments of introspection. Meanwhile, their social circle remained oblivious to the tensions. During company events or dinners with friends, Nicholas and Emily maintained the facade of an ideal couple. Emily's jokes still got a laugh, and Nicholas' attentive demeanor continued to impress everyone. But when they were alone, silence filled the spaces between words. Even with the clouds hanging over their relationship, they both believed, on some level, that they could get through it. Perhaps it was just a phase, something that time or communication would resolve. After all, they had overcome challenges before, and the love they had for each other was still there, albeit more muted and contained. However, life often has a way of making what is already delicate even more complicated. While Nicholas concentrated on protecting what he considered most important, and Emily sought to understand her own emotions, unseen forces were in motion, setting the stage for events that would change everything. They didn't know it yet, but the path they were following would lead them to a crossroads where choices would have to be made, truths would come to light and nothing would ever be the same again. The days went by like a rehearsed dance between Nicholas and Emily, where the movements were automatic and predictable, but the melody seemed more and more distant. Nicholas devoted himself even more fervently to his work. His project had become the absolute priority, and he plunged into long hours of meetings, tight deadlines and unexpected trips. It was as if he was trying to find meaning for his own restlessness in professional success. Emily, on the other hand, found refuge in the design studio. There, creativity flowed, and she felt that there was still a piece of herself intact, vibrant. On the days when David was around, the moments at work took on a lighter, almost comforting tone. He was skilled at making people feel at ease, and Emily was no exception. They shared ideas, light confidences and easy laughter, while the hours passed without her noticing. One afternoon, David suggested that Emily take part in a design exhibition with him. "It'll be good for your career," he said, with an encouraging smile. She hesitated, but eventually agreed. The event was in another city and would require a 2-day trip. Emily informed Nicholas, who, distracted by his own commitments, just nodded in approval. He didn't notice the hesitation in her voice or the way she avoided details. On the day of the trip, Nicholas was immersed in an urgent report when Emily left the house. He barely noticed her departure, just muttered, "Good luck," without looking away from the computer screen. In the car, Emily felt a twinge of guilt, but quickly stifled it. It was just a business trip, she repeated to herself, as if the words were enough to silence the worry. The exhibition was busy, full of influential people in the design world. Emily felt energized, almost invigorated, as she chatted with colleagues and presented her work. David was always around, offering praise and support. It was easy to get lost in the energy of the moment and forget the weight of the doubts she was carrying. That evening, after the event, David suggested dinner at a nearby restaurant. "We should celebrate today's success," he said, with a warm tone that made her smile. Emily hesitated for a moment, but the idea seemed harmless. Over dinner, the conversation flowed naturally, with David sharing stories about his career and encouraging Emily to talk about her dreams. She felt understood in a way she hadn't for a long time, and for a moment, she forgot everything she had left behind. Later, David accompanied her to the hotel. When they reached the door of the room, he hesitated, as if waiting for some sign. Emily felt her heart racing, a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. She knew she should take a step back, end the night there, but instead she opened the door and invited him in. The silence that followed was loaded with meanings that they both understood without exchanging a word. That night, the lines she had sworn not to cross were blurred. Emily woke up early, while David was still asleep, and stared at the ceiling, feeling a wave of contradictory emotions. Guilt, confusion, and a strange sense of freedom mixed together. She knew it would change everything, but she still couldn't process what she had done. Meanwhile, Nicholas remained oblivious to events. He worked late that night, immersed in the details of the project that promised him recognition and security. He believed that the effort would be worth it, that Emily would understand the reason for his absences and that he would soon be able to compensate her with quality time. He didn't know that the time she was looking for was already being filled by another presence. When Emily returned home 2 days later, Nicholas welcomed her with a quick hug and a tired smile. "How was the exhibition?" he asked, not expecting much more than a standard response. Emily replied in short sentences, mentioning the success of the event and how tired she was from traveling. Nicholas noticed something different about her, a kind of discomfort that he couldn't name, but chose not to press. He believed that time would sort everything out. In the days that followed, Emily tried to act as if nothing had happened. She got involved at work, avoided prolonged meetings with David and made efforts to be more present at home. But the betrayal, although buried under layers of denial, was like an invisible crack that was beginning to spread. Nicholas, for his part, began to notice more details that had previously escaped his radar. Messages received on Emily's cell phone at the most inopportune times, sudden departures to sort something out at work, and a distraction that seemed ever present. He tried to ignore it, but a growing unease crept in. One evening, while she was in the shower, he saw her cell phone on the table and, for the first time, was tempted to look at it. He picked it up, but hesitated. He didn't want to be that kind of husband, suspicious and invasive. But something inside him urged him on, a need to understand what was going on. He unlocked his cell phone and saw a notification, a message from David. The content wasn't explicit, but the tone was informal, intimate in a way that made Nicholas uncomfortable. He put the phone back, but the feeling of doubt was now a dark certainty. That same week, Nicholas had the opportunity to leave work early. He decided to surprise Emily, something he hadn't done for a while. He went to a flower shop and bought her favorite flowers, imagining that this might bring back some of the magic he felt was lost. When he got home, her car wasn't in the garage. He called, but she didn't answer. Determined to wait, Nicholas sat on the sofa with the flowers beside him, trying to ignore the tightness in his chest. Almost 2 hours later, Emily arrived. The smile that appeared when she saw him was brief and full of surprise. "I didn't expect you home so soon," she said, trying to sound casual. Nicholas asked where she was, and she replied that she had stayed late at work, something he knew to be a lie. The discomfort in the room was palpable. Nicholas watched Emily as if trying to solve a riddle, while she avoided his gaze, fiddling with her fingers. Finally, he decided not to press the issue, but the doubt had already taken root. The days that followed were marked by tension and silence. Nicholas could no longer ignore the mounting evidence, while Emily felt the weight of the choices she had made. They moved around the house like strangers, each trapped in their own thoughts, until the distance between them became unbearable. And then came the night that would change everything. A company party, an unexpected encounter, and a look that revealed more than any words could say. The truth was lurking, ready to emerge and transform their lives into something they could never have predicted. Nicholas walked through the house with calculated steps, his thoughts weighing more than any physical fatigue. The air seemed charged, as if something invisible was about to break. Emily, sitting at the kitchen table, fiddled nervously with an almost cold mug of tea. She knew that Nicholas' silence wasn't just the result of a long day at work. There was something else, something he hadn't yet verbalized, but which could be felt in every restrained gesture. "Can we talk?" He finally broke the silence, his voice low but firm. Emily nodded, unable to hold his gaze. "Of course," she replied, almost in a whisper, as she tucked her hair behind her ear, an automatic gesture that revealed her anxiety. Nicholas sat in front of her, his hands clasped together on the table, as if he were trying to gather the strength he needed for what was to follow. "I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me," he began, his tone controlled but charged with a tension that made Emily's heart race. "Why are you talking like that? What happened?" Emily tried to turn away, but Nicholas' gaze fixed her in place, as if he had been waiting for exactly that. "I know about David," he said, the words sounding almost like a punch. The silence that followed was crushing. Emily blinked, her eyes wide, and her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. It was as if the ground had been ripped out from under her feet. "Nicholas, I don't know what you're talking about," she tried, but the lie sounded so flimsy that she didn't believe it herself. "Don't do that," he replied, his voice laden with a pain that seemed to tear the air. "I've seen the messages. I've seen how you change when you talk about him, as if he were the center of your world. There's no need to deny it." Emily swallowed, her eyes filling with tears. She tried to speak, but the knot in her throat was too big. Finally, the words escaped, slurred and desperate. "I never wanted you to find out like this. I don't know what to say." Nicholas looked away for a moment, as if he needed to pull himself together. "I want to understand, Emily. Why? What did I do to push you into this?" She shook her head, the tears now flowing freely. "It wasn't you, Nicholas. It was never you. I was lost, confused. I felt that something was missing in me. It's not about what you did or didn't do. It's about me." He remained silent, letting her explain herself, but his hardened expression showed that this didn't soften the blow. "And that's why you thought it was right to betray me?" he finally asked, his voice now laced with bitterness. "You could have talked to me. You could have told me what you were feeling." "I tried," she retorted, her voice rising a little. "But you were always so focused on work, so obsessed with giving us security that you didn't seem to listen to me anymore. I felt invisible." Nicholas closed his eyes for a moment, as if trying to absorb everything. When he opened them, something in his expression had changed. It was no longer just pain, it was determination. "I understand that you felt that way. Perhaps I failed to see what was happening. But that doesn't justify what you did." Emily lowered her head, unable to face him. The weight of his words was unbearable. I know, she said, almost inaudibly. I know what I did was wrong. Nicholas stood, taking a deep breath as if trying to stabilize himself. There's something you need to know, he said, his voice now more controlled, but still charged with emotion. While you were cheating on me, I was also doing something. Not to hurt you, but to protect what's mine. Emily looked up, confused. What do you mean? Do you think I didn't notice the changes? That I didn't notice your distance, your apologies. I may have been slow to accept it, but I've never been blind. And when I started to put the pieces together, I realized that I needed to prepare. Prepare for what? She asked, panic beginning to creep into her voice. For the inevitable. For the moment when it would all come out. So I did what I needed to do. I protected what we had built together, or at least what I thought we had. I gathered evidence, Emily. Messages, photos, everything you tried to hide. Emily felt the air disappear from her lungs. You. Are you saying you spied on me? I'm saying I protected myself, he corrected. And there's more. Something you don't know, but which will change everything. She stared at him, her hands trembling on the table. Nicholas, what have you done? He didn't answer immediately, just watched her with an intensity that made her shudder. You'll find out soon enough, he said, with frightening calm. And I hope you're prepared to deal with the consequences. Silence filled the room again, but this time it wasn't just uncomfortable. It was a kind of prelude, a warning that something monumental was about to happen. Emily felt the weight of it like an impending storm, and although she desperately wanted to know what Nicholas was holding back, a part of her feared the answer. Nicholas remained still, his rigid figure contrasting with Emily's obvious vulnerability. The silence between them seemed alive, pulsing with the weight of everything that had been said and what was yet to come. She watched him, searching for some hint of what he intended to reveal, but Nicholas' face was an impassive mask. For the first time, she realized how much she had underestimated him. He took a deep breath and took a few steps across the room before finally turning to face her again. You know, Emily, he began, his voice low, almost a whisper, I spent a long time believing that our life was impervious to anything. I thought our years together meant more than that. But then you started to change, and I realized that something was wrong. And the worst part was that I didn't know if it was something I could fix. Emily held her breath. Nicholas' every word was like a slow, deliberate blow, and she didn't know how to respond. Nicholas, I'm sorry, she tried, but he held up his hand, silencing her. I don't want your apologies now. They won't change anything, he said, his voice hardening slightly. But there is something you need to understand. I loved you. I still do, in a way, and that's exactly why it hurts so much. But what hurts me even more is knowing that, while I was trying to protect us, you were sabotaging everything. Emily felt the tears welling up again, but this time she didn't try to hide them. Please, just tell me what you did. I want to understand. Nicholas stared at her for a moment before finally sitting down again, this time leaning forward, as if he was about to confess something that was eating him up inside. You know I'm methodical. I always have been. So when I began to suspect that something was going on, I decided I couldn't just ignore it. I hired a private investigator, Emily. I've followed your every move over the last few weeks. Emily stood motionless, his words echoing in her mind. You followed me? Her voice was full of incredulity, almost offended, but Nicholas' expression didn't change. I didn't just follow, he continued, his voice now firmer. I documented everything. Every encounter with David. Every lie you told me about being at work. I have everything. Emily felt a mixture of shame and anger rising to the surface. Did you really do that? Nicholas, that's invasive. I know I did wrong, but this is extreme. Extreme. He stood up again, now walking around the room with renewed energy. Extreme was you choosing to destroy what we had because of him. I did what I needed to do to protect not only myself, but what we had built. And you know what else I discovered, Emily? I discovered that the two of you weren't just sharing moments, but planning something. Confusion took over her face. Planning something? What are you implying? Nicholas stopped walking and turned to face her, his eyes shining with something she couldn't decipher. Did you know that David has a history of getting involved in situations like this? He finds vulnerable, married women and manipulates them for personal gain. He used you, Emily. And you let him. That's absurd, she exclaimed, her voice shaking. David would never do that. He understands me, he supports me, understands. Nicholas laughed, a bitter, incredulous sound. He understands how to use your dissatisfaction against you. You know what I found out? He was convincing you to embezzle money from our joint accounts. You were starting to take small amounts, thinking I'd never notice. Emily paled, his words hitting her like a slap. That's not true, she whispered, but her voice betrayed the insecurity she felt. Isn't it? Nicholas crossed his arms, leaning forward slightly. I have the records. Every transfer. You signed it, Emily. It's all documented. He wanted you to do it so he could get away with it when everything fell apart. But I saw it coming, and guess what? I've already recovered everything. The accounts are frozen, and he won't see a penny. Emily felt the world spin around her. The revelation left her speechless. She trusted David, or at least believed she could. I didn't. I didn't know that. He said it was a loan, that he needed help. Of course he did, Nicholas interrupted, his voice now laced with sarcasm. And you believed him, because you wanted to believe that he was the answer to something that was missing in your life. But all he did was use you, Emily. And in the process, he almost destroyed everything we had. Emily brought her hands up to her face, trying to stifle the sobs that began to escape. The shame and guilt were now unbearable. Nicholas, I didn't know. I was an idiot, blind. I don't know what to say. He remained silent for a moment before sighing deeply. I don't know either, Emily. What I do know is that all of this, changes everything. And I don't know if we can go back to the way things were. She stared at him, her eyes red and full of pleading. I can fix this. Please, Nicholas, let me try. I don't want to lose you. I didn't want to lose you either, he replied, his voice now full of weariness. But it feels like I lost you a long time ago, even before all this. I just didn't realize it until now. Silence once again filled the space between them, but this time, there was nothing more to say. The weight of the truth hung in the air, and they both knew that whatever came next would be irreversible. The tension that hung in the air after the revelation seemed almost tangible, as if there was an invisible line pulled to its maximum between Nicholas and Emily, about to break. He remained motionless, arms crossed, gaze fixed on the floor. She, sitting with her hands restlessly in her lap, seemed smaller, shrinking under the weight of her choices. The silence was almost unbearable, but neither of them knew how to break it. I never imagined things would come to this, he finally said, his voice low, almost a whisper. There was no anger there, just exhaustion. I've worked so hard, for us. For all of this. He gestured vaguely towards the house, but Emily knew he wasn't just talking about the walls and furniture. He was talking about the years, the efforts, the shared moments. He was talking about the life they had built together and which now seemed fragile, like cracked glass. I don't know how to fix it, Nicholas, she replied, her voice trembling. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But it seems that the more I try to justify it, the more I realize that I've only made it worse. He looked up at her, and something in his expression made her cringe even more. There's no fixing it, Emily. You understand that, right? It's not something you can fix with apologies or good intentions. His words were like blades, but she knew he was right. Still, she couldn't help it. I just wanted you to listen to me. I wanted you to understand how I was feeling. You wanted me to. He let out a bitter laugh. I realized, Emily. I just didn't know how to deal with it. I thought that if I tried harder, if I managed to ensure our safety, you'd feel better. I thought I was doing the right thing. I know. I know that now, she said quickly, desperate for him to understand. But at the time, it felt like you were so far away. And then David came along, and he made me feel seen. Nicholas took a deep breath, closing his eyes for a moment. He made you feel seen while he was using you. You understand that now, don't you? Emily nodded, unable to look directly at him. I was naive. I wanted to believe that he really cared, because it was easier than facing what was wrong here. Wrong here, Nicholas repeated, as if savoring the words, trying to find some meaning in them. Maybe it's always been wrong, and we just didn't want to admit it. Emily looked up at him in surprise. Are you saying that you think our marriage never worked? That's not it, he said, shaking his head slowly. I think it worked, for a while. But at some point, something changed. Maybe we stopped prioritizing each other. Maybe we started living like housemates instead of partners. I don't know. All I know is that now, looking back, it feels like we were building something on an already cracked foundation. She wanted to argue, she wanted to say that he was wrong, that they still had something to fight for. But the words died in her throat. Because, deep down, she knew he was right. So, what do we do now? She finally asked, her voice almost inaudible. He was silent for a long moment before answering. I don't know, Emily. I really don't know. Part of me wants to just end it all, leave it behind and move on. But another part can't let go of everything so easily. Emily felt a spark of hope at his last words. If there's a part of you that still wants to try, then maybe we can find a way. Maybe we can. Don't start with maybe, he interrupted her, his voice harsher now. Because there are no guarantees here. And to be honest, I don't know if I can look at you the same way after all this. She felt the impact of his words like a physical blow. I understand, she said, her voice almost breaking. I understand that it's going to take time, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes. For us. He watched her for a long time, as if trying to decide whether she really believed what she was saying. The problem is that us doesn't mean the same thing to me now. Not after everything you've done. Not after everything I've found out. Emily swallowed, feeling the tears build up again. I still love you, Nicholas, she said, her voice full of emotion. And I know I don't have the right to ask for it, but I hope you can give me a chance to prove it. He shook his head slowly, as if her words weren't enough to break through the wall he had built around himself. Loving someone isn't enough, Emily. Not when the trust is gone. So you'll never forgive me? She asked, her voice desperate. I don't know, he answered honestly. And that's the hardest part. Because even if I want to forgive, I don't know if I can forget. His words echoed in the room, filling the empty space between them. It was a dilemma with no easy answer, and they both knew it. Emily bowed her head, tears now falling freely, while Nicholas stood still, a man torn between love and betrayal, trying to find a way through the wreckage of everything they had built together. Finally, he took a deep breath and walked away. I need time, he said, his voice calm but firm. Time to think, to process all this. And you should also use that time to think about what you really want. Emily wanted to hold him, to beg him to stay, but she knew it wouldn't do any good. Instead, she simply nodded, letting him walk out the door without saying another word. The silence that followed was deafening. And as she stood there, alone with her thoughts, a single question echoed in her mind: was it too late to mend what had been broken? The silence between Nicholas and Emily didn't just last for days, it stretched into weeks. During this time, Nicholas immersed himself in deep reflections on what remained of their relationship. He drifted apart emotionally, but at the same time was unable to make a definitive decision. Emily, on the other hand, experienced a period of growing anguish, not knowing whether her regret was enough to rebuild something or whether all was already lost. Nicholas, in his search for answers, decided to leave home for a few days, needing space to process everything. He rented a small cottage in an isolated location, far from distractions. It was there that he began to realize that his own quest for perfection and control had contributed to the distance between him and Emily. Not that it justified what she had done, but, for the first time, he recognized his share of responsibility for the failure of the marriage. What he couldn't accept, however, was the abuse of trust. Meanwhile, Emily was living in emotional limbo. She began attending therapy, determined to understand why she had allowed her dissatisfaction to take her so far. Each session was a mirror that reflected her weaknesses and wrong choices, but also encouraged her to face reality more clearly. Although she desperately wanted Nicholas back, she began to realize that her journey of redemption needed to be about more than just getting her husband back, it was about getting herself back. The distance between them created space for both of them to reflect, but it also brought an inevitable conclusion. When Nicholas finally returned home, the atmosphere was charged with tension, but also with a kind of silent acceptance. Emily welcomed him cautiously, like someone who knows that any word could be the last. He, in turn, seemed calmer, but also more distant. "We need to talk," he said, as he put his things on the table. Emily nodded and followed him into the living room. "I've done a lot of thinking while I've been away," Nicholas began, his voice neutral, almost cold. "And I've come to a conclusion. I can't go on living like this, with this constant doubt. I've tried to imagine a future where we can overcome this, but, the truth is that I can't trust you anymore. And without trust, there is no marriage." Emily felt the words like a knife through her chest. She knew it was a possibility, but hearing it out loud broke her down. "I understand," she said, her voice breaking. "And even though it hurts to hear it, I accept it. I just want you to know that I'm really sorry." Nicholas looked at her, his eyes reflecting a mixture of sadness and resignation. "I know you are. But that doesn't change what happened. And it doesn't change the fact that, every time I look at you, I see the choices you made and how they brought us here." The next few days were filled with practical decisions. Nicholas began organizing the divorce, while Emily started looking for a new place to live. The process was painful, but it also brought a kind of relief. They both knew that, even with all the love that had once existed, going their separate ways was the only way to start again. Meanwhile, David was facing his own consequences. Nicholas had sent all the evidence of his actions to the company's ethics department. The result was an internal investigation that exposed not only his involvement with Emily, but also other unethical practices. He was fired and, with his reputation destroyed, was unable to continue in the same industry. When Emily found out what Nicholas had done, she didn't feel anger, but a strange sense of justice. It was as if the universe was finally balancing things out. Time passed, and Nicholas began to find a new rhythm in life. One sunny afternoon, he went to a cafe he used to go to before he met Emily. Sitting at a table near the window, he was approached by a woman with curly brown hair and a warm smile. She asked permission to share a table, as the place was full. They started chatting, and Nicholas felt something he hadn't felt for a long time, lightness. Her name was Clara and, over time, their occasional chats in the cafe turned into dinners and walks. Clara wasn't someone looking to fill gaps, but someone who encouraged him to open up to new possibilities. Emily, on the other hand, found a kind of peace in her journey of self-knowledge. She moved into a small apartment and continued her therapy. She started giving talks about graphic design, something she had always wanted to do but never had the courage. More than that, she learned to be comfortable with solitude, something she had previously feared. Although she still missed Nicholas, she knew that the end of the marriage had been necessary for both of them to find their truths. In the end, Nicholas and Emily's path didn't bring them back to each other, but led them to places where they could both start again. And, in a strange way, there was beauty in that. The love they shared was not erased, but transformed into learning, a reminder of who they were and who they could be. What do you think of this story? Comment and share your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Remember, betrayal is never the answer. It destroys more than hearts, it destroys lives. Thanks for listening and see you next time.